Immanuel Kant's thought. We are just looking at what we want to see. Kant is a great philosopher who has revolutionized the history of philosophy. What are the limits of human cognition? Number 1, fusing Bacon's empiricism with Descartes' rationalism. Kant is a German philosopher about 300 years ago. He is one of the most important figures in the history of philosophy. Before Kant appeared, there was a conflict between a philosopher named Bacon and a philosopher named Descartes. Bacon was an empirical person who emphasized experience and believed in what people see and touch. Descartes, on the other hand, emphasized human thinking and criticized experience because it is unreliable and apt to be mistaken. Kant surprisingly criticized both of them. For example, the question whether God exists. Empiricism suggests that God does not exist because humans cannot see or touch it. But does God really exist? Isn't it too simple to think that it doesn't exist because humans can't recognize it? On the contrary, if you think in terms of rationalism, God exists, or does not exist, because of, it's kind of ambiguous, isn't it? Since a person just thinks in his or her head, the way of thinking changes depending on the person. Maybe it's right in his or her head, but isn't it clunky or dogmatic? Kant points at the limits of empiricism and rationalism, and what is it to experience and think in the first place? He thought. Eventually he fused empiricism with rationalism. Kant is a genius and difficult for an ordinary person like us to understand, but understanding his way of thinking changes the way we look at the world by 180 degrees. It's okay to understand it little by little. Number 2, how we perceive things. For example, suppose a person sees a red and round thing. Next, in his head, he understands that a red and round thing is an apple. In this way, he recognizes the apple in front of him. Why could he recognize the red and round thing in front of him as the apple? That's because he had seen and heard the apple in the past. In other words, he can recognize things because he has experienced in the past. To put it the other way around, he cannot see the red and round thing itself. He can only see the apple. One question arises here. Why can he imagine the red and round thing though he can't see the red and round thing itself? It is because he has reason that does not depend on his experience, that is, the ability to think in his minds. However, he just imagines the red and round thing in his head, so what it looks like depends on each person's way of thinking. Thus, in order for us to recognize things, we need both empiricism, seeing and hearing, and rationalism, thinking and imagining in our heads. Number 3, Copernican Revolution. We are just looking at what we want to see. The following conclusions can be drawn from the above idea. There is an apple because I am looking at it. It's funny, is not it? Most people think that I am looking at an apple because there is an apple. Let's think about one more example. If there are no living things on this earth, will the sunset still be red? No. If there is no one to see, the sunset is no color. There is something because people see, not because there is something. Kant turned over people's common sense 180 degrees. This is called the Copernican Revolution. By the way, Copernicus is an astronomer. Before the advent of Copernicus, it was thought that the sun was orbiting the earth, but when he discovered that the earth was orbiting the sun, Copernicus turned people's ideas 180 degrees. Kant's philosophy, like Copernicus, has achieved a feat that upsets conventional wisdom 180 degrees. Number 4, after all, it's a personal matter. It depends on the person. Let's organize the story so far. First of all, red and round things can only be imagined in the head, so they differ from person to person. Also, apples vary from person to person because they change depending on his or her experience. Therefore, no one knows what the round and red thing really is. It's the limit of human recognition. However, conversely, we can think that each person can see things freely. From here Kant begins to think about moral issues. He preached how each person should choose his or her way of life. Number 5, good feelings are important. The purpose of life is not happiness but self-fulfillment. Kant thought that the motivation for doing it was important, not the result of things. For example, suppose you volunteer with a good motive to help someone in need. Even if the volunteer did not help others as a result, He thought it was a good thing because he started with a good motive to help those in need. What do you think of this idea? I'm the type of person who wants to focus on results rather than motivation. I think it doesn't make much sense for volunteers who are useless. Of course, there is no correct answer. Kant also preaches his own way of thinking about happiness. Until now, philosophers have thought that living happily is the purpose of life. However, Kant thought that the purpose of life was not to live happily, but to be a person who deserves happiness. No matter how good you do, you cannot always be happy. It depends on the environment in which you were born and the times. Even if you can't be happy as a result, Kant thought it was precious to continue doing good deeds, and the purpose of your life was to continue doing good deeds and grow yourself. Kant may have been a philosopher who valued the process more than the result,